Welcome to Emergent Behavior, where we explore this moment in time just before artificial intelligence changes the world as we know it, where we talk to the builders and creators, entrepreneurs and engineers, where we ask questions to which we don't actually know the answers to. I'm your host, Prakash Narayanan, known on Twitter as AdaPi. Hello, and welcome to Emergent Behavior. I'm thrilled to have Jim Yu, founder and executive chair of BrightEdge, joining me today. Jim is a visionary leader in the world of search engine optimization, guiding BrightEdge's mission to empower marketers to optimize their content and digital presence for search in this era of AI. I'm joined today by my guest host, Daniel Griffin, who runs Archgens, an R&D lab building tools for evaluating search engines. In this episode, we'll explore the seismic shift happening in the search landscape as AI-first search engines like Perplexity challenge Google's dominance, how AI-generated referrals are transforming the value of search traffic, and what this means for marketers, the unique challenges Google faces as it navigates the innovator's dilemma in a world where AI is changing the game, how brand and businesses can leverage the power of AI optimization to establish their authority and influence in their niche areas. Jim brings a wealth of experience and insight to this conversation. He's been at the forefront of search for 18 years, leading BrightEdge to become a trusted partner for over 50% of the Fortune 500. His perspective on the evolving landscape of search, especially in the context of AI, is invaluable. This episode is a must-listen for anyone interested in the future of search, marketing, and the impact of AI on how we access and consume information. As always, if you enjoy the show, the number one thing you can do to support us is to follow Emergent Behavior on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every follow massively boosts our reach. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at emergentbehavior.co to stay up to date on all our latest episodes, including my research and preparation notes for each podcast. And you can find me on Twitter at numeric8TEAPI. Without further ado, let's dive into this fascinating conversation about AI and the future of search with Jim Yu. Okay, so hi, Jim, and what is BrightEdge?
So at BrightEdge, we are an enterprise technology for helping marketers really optimize their content and their digital presence for search, and we're used by over 50% of the Fortune 500. And so at this moment, what we're doing is we're really helping companies redefine marketing and search in kind of this AI era, right? We're built on a very robust and extensive index of all the global sort of search data available. And we use that to help clients be able to win in AI and in this sort of increasingly AI-driven world of search. And as I mentioned, we're the trusted partner for over 2,000 companies and over 50% of the Fortune 500.
And so I think maybe to put in context, what had happened before was I'd read this commentary, I think from one of BrightEdge's, materials about, Perplexity having like a 40% month-on-month increase or whatever. And I couldn't really place in context what these numbers were about. And so Daniel Griffin, who is a search expert, was like, oh, it's from BrightEdge's clients, etc. But I wanted to just come straight to the source and just ask you, like, what are you guys seeing? What are your clients seeing? How is Perplexity's entrance as a AI first, AI native so-called search engine changing things?
Yeah, great question. So a little bit of context here, right? So this, we have been in business. I started BrightEdge almost 18 years ago. So we've been in the industry of search for a very long time. And one of the things our customers do with BrightEdge is they use our technology. Part of our technology is the analytics that helps them understand how do they show up in search engines, and also what's the result in terms of the traffic to their business, the conversions, the revenue, and all this stuff. And we process all that data. We provide algorithms, and that helps them sort of manage this very important sort of search and discovery channel for their products and their services. And so that becomes kind of the core sort of data set, right, that we use to drive research. And for AI, what's been very interesting is we have, taking a step back a little bit, right? In the world of search, 18 years ago, it was mostly text-based, right? The traditional paradigm of search has always been you put in a keyword, it comes back with 10 blue links, right? And you go figure out which things you think are relevant, which ones aren't. But it's basically up to the user, up to the searcher to go figure it out. So in that world, we built these technology called kind of parsing to parse different types of information and data. Then as search, over the last, I'd say, decade or so has become more interactive, right? The results are more visual. You've got sort of images, videos, different types of formats, quick kind of answers that show up in the search engine. So we built a set of technologies called visual parsing, where it renders the page and it processes the information. But for the generative era, right, over the last 12 months or so, there's been a huge disruption and change in search where companies are leveraging large language models and generative AI to really turbocharge search, right? And so in order to understand that environment, we've built these generative parsers that interact with generative search engines to understand the kinds of AI experiences that they are providing as people search. Combine that with the data set that we have of what kind of sort of traffic and what kind of conversions are coming back to these major brands, it gives us a good corpus of information to understand the evolution of search. And so as a part of that, what we have always done and are doing at an accelerated pace right now is publishing information to help businesses understand and technologists understand, so what does all this mean? What is this change that's happening? And so the data you're referring to is data that we published because we found it very fascinating that for the last decade, right? For the last decade, the world order of search has not really changed. And what I mean by the world order of search, what I mean by that is if I'm a big brand or any website, where the flow of search traffic comes from is mostly Google. It's 90+% Google. And that has not changed for a decade. But early this year, we noticed something really interesting, that for the first time ever in the last decade, there was emergence of new search engines that actually drove traffic, referral traffic to businesses and sites. The reason this metric is really, really important is it actually sets the context of the entire web ecosystem and the flow of sort of traffic and visitors. And in that context, it's very important then to understand what's happening in terms of the engines that are emerging. And it is through that lens that we identified that there were new entrants that are actually starting to crack open just a tiny sliver, right? Just a tiny sliver, but they're starting to crack open sort of this sort of opportunity to kind of change the world order. And that is the perplexity data. The perplexity data is that for the first time, you have a new search engine that is actually driving referral traffic to large companies in the ecosystem. And it is growing by leaps and bounds. And so that 40% is a month-over-month growth of referral traffic to major brands from a search engine that is not Google, right? So does that change the market share? It actually doesn't. It's like 0.07%. It's something in that neighborhood.
0.0.
So it is not toppling the world order just yet, right? It's still 90+%. However, the fact that this is growing fast and it is changing, that's a new phenomenon. And that's exciting because that means something's happening here, right? So that's what that data is. And stay tuned. We'll continue to publish more data. We're tracking this very, very closely. And our generative parsers, we've also published a lot of data. Just today, we published a ton of data around how Google is changing since I.O. and its new sort of AI overviews as they've gone sort of to general availability with their new AI version of their search engine.
Yeah. So that's super interesting because what would you say I know Google's probably like 95, 96, somewhere around percentage market share. You have Bing at I think 1 or 2%, I think, and who are the other major guys in that last 5%, before Perplexity was there?
So I think before Perplexity was there, ChatGPT was starting to already show up. But it's very interesting, right? ChatGPT shows up, but it's not materially more than Perplexity because there's a very interesting thing here, right? And this is a new dynamic that we have to think about in the world of AI, right? Which is ChatGPT obviously has a ton of traffic, right? A ton of traffic, a lot of users. But the way it shares information is it generates the answer without a ton of transparency into the citations. So Perplexity is on the other end of the extreme, which I think is a good thing, right? They provide the most transparency into where the AI is generating the information. So citations are a first-class citizen inside Perplexity. And so for that reason, even though ChatGPT has a lot more users, it doesn't flow back out a lot of traffic into the ecosystem, right? But it is, that being said, it still is flowing some traffic into the ecosystem as well. So ChatGPT was showing up before Perplexity. Microsoft had a little bit of a boost in the beginning, but it hasn't sort of continued to grow. Like Bing's market share with the introduction of Copilot has not materially increased in terms of what it's doing in the ecosystem, in terms of that. But it is still a material player. There are some new entrants that are starting to show up a little bit outside of Perplexity. There's some players like, U.com is showing up a little bit. You're seeing blips, right? You are seeing people play with these different search engines, and it's fascinating. This is, again, the last time I remember a new entrant really raising a lot of money to attack this market was a company called Bleco that had raised huge amounts of money, because search is expensive. The infrastructure to build search is really expensive. And so you have to have conviction that you can go after an existing series of players that have huge moats around their business they're difficult to disrupt. But this moment is interesting because in technology inflection points, there's opportunity for disruption. And I think we are in the middle of one right now in search.
Yeah. Is the value of a Perplexity or a ChatGPT search the same as a value of a Google search, like a referral, not a search, but a referral, right? Because
great question. And I think it's going to be very, very different, right? And let me tell you why. I think the world is going to evolve to different AI engines used for different use cases, right? So Google obviously is the dominant search provider for almost all different kinds of search use cases. But when you're searching, sometimes it's a direct navigational search. And what I mean by that is, if I'm searching for a brand, sometimes if I type in something like, let's say CNN, I'm just trying to navigate to the site. A lot of people will type in sort of a domain and just navigate to that site. So there's a navigational search. Then there's research use cases where I'm actually saying, hey, I want to actually do some research, right? And that's actually something Perplexity, I think, is very, very good at. It's designed around research. Sometimes it's actually transactional. I want to go buy something. I want to go somewhere. I want to do something. Those things are a little different. Those type of search use cases are actually other kinds of moments and use cases where you want to use search. So the thing is, I think you're going to find that these AI search engines are used for very different use cases. And the value of that referral traffic is going to actually be dependent on the kind of use case they're being used for, right? Because what's going to happen, I believe, is that depending on what kind of customer you're trying to reach, in what stage of the buying cycle as a marketer, it's going to have an impact on the value of that referral traffic.
Yeah. So, Daniel, go ahead.
Well, I mean, Google hasn't been saying something about the differentiation between the customers, but they have been claiming that it seems that SGE or AI overview is the person that's clicking that link is more high value because they already learned a bunch and then they clicked still. Yes. I was wondering whether your search generative parser, other data you have will help your clients distinguish those and tell this search engine actually is really sending us great early adopter users. We want to work with
Absolutely.
them more.
Absolutely, right? Because so two things that you have to understand from a value per user perspective. One thing is that when you look at the search engine and you look at the results that are being generated via the AI, it's very clear that it's no longer just kind of this exact match keyword, right? So the traditional world of search for the last 20, 30 years has been you put in a keyword and it surfaces results around that keyword. What it is now doing with the AI is it is executing a series, in a lot of cases, of 4 or 5 follow-up questions and queries, and then executing all those searches at the same time, and then summarizing all that. So if I'm shopping, for example, if I'm shopping for, let's say like running shoes, it's actually going to go tell me about the different types of running shoes, the features to look for, the latest models to consider, the prices. It's going to execute all those searches at the same time, then use the large language model to summarize that information. So when I go through all that and then I click, and let's say I click on your model, I'm a pretty well qualified user relative to somebody who was going to go through 4 or 5 different searches to get to that point in the life cycle. So by and large, I think it is true, and it has a lot of implications in terms of how you want to create content, how you want to structure your sites. There's a lot of implications for businesses and marketers and technologists. But by and large, I think the LLMs and the AI versions of the search engines, the power core use case is that summarization of lots of information. So it makes somebody 100 times better at searching than they were ever than the average consumer, right? So I think that's part one. Part two, to your question of measurement, it is still very important to measure and quantify the post-click conversion. And what I mean by that is when it does land on your website, I do expect that visitor in many cases to be much more valuable, but you still have to measure that and make sure that the delta in the value is worth the effort of what you're doing to go get that visit, right? And so with fewer visits in some cases, but much more qualified, and you have to quantify the value of those type of visits.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things is that I think what Perplexity is selling, at least, is that that there is this innovator's dilemma that Google faces in that delivering a much better search answer would be an answer engine rather than a search engine. And once you enter this answer engine process, the user kind of just stops there, right? Like they have the answer and they don't need to actually go to the website. They don't need it to actually like continue. And it's just kind of like, that's it. And that this is actually a something which, and this is, I think, also several people in AI have this view as well. OpenAI has, for example, said that so far they do not want to proceed down the ad-driven route for their answers. So how does this work? I mean, does Google really face this innovator's dilemma, which I think they're trying to fend off? But do they face this innovator's dilemma where having a better search experience where you just provide the answer without having to click through the links is actually going to be a much better experience, but detrimental to their revenue?
I think that's a great question. And I think what's very interesting is they do have an innovator's dilemma, but it's not quite that one. And what I mean by that is when you look at Google, and we've tracked this for 17, 18 years, and we do it across almost every industry, and we do it across billions of queries, right? And so your innovator's dilemma for Google is actually you cover so much waterfront. It's like when you're doing location search, every business on a planet has a point of interest, the hours they're open, the reviews that are there, every sort of hotel, every flight, every news story, like the sheer amount of stuff, every disease, the sheer amount of stuff that you can get wrong is like pretty tough, right? Now, there are huge assets. The data assets are incredible. The sort of the audience they have is incredible. The moats they have around the specific proprietary data feeds that they get from publishers and those individual businesses are very, very powerful, and they're real time, and they have inventory and all these things from the big retailers. So for a lot of search use cases, it's very, very powerful as moats. But it's also difficult to move. I mean, you have so much risk. You can see it right now as it's playing out. There's just so much risk. Like they get a little bit wrong on healthcare, everybody's slamming them, right? You get a little bit wrong on news, everybody slams them. the amount of exposure just from the waterfront you've got to cover is really hard to innovate. That is an innovator's dilemma, but it's a little different than they can't do research. I would assert that I think they still have a huge advantage on the sheer corpus of information and data that they have access to that nobody else has. And more importantly than just that, they have the best real-time data, because in a lot of data sets, recency is very, very important. Like there's so much that's moving quickly. And so being able to cover that, those are big moats, those are big assets for them. But their ability to get it right is pretty tough. Now, in specific instances, I think Perplexity has huge advantages. Like anything to do with researching before you buy, having this position where you're taking a business model that is more sort of subscription driven as opposed to ad driven allows you to take a very sort of balanced view and an unbiased view into providing a well-researched sort of perspective, right? That being said, convenience for shopping, as Amazon has proven, is very, very important for the customer, right? Like the fact that you can purchase everything on Amazon actually makes many consumers buy more on Amazon. Are the reviews on Amazon really better than good research on Google? Probably not. And is Perplexity going to be even better than Google at that? Probably. But is that really what the shopper is looking for? There's a balance of convenience and research. And so I think there's certain places where Perplexity is really, really going to win. But I'm not convinced necessarily that that's where the innovator's dilemma lies. I do think that for Google, there is an innovator's dilemma, and it's a really, really hard one. I mean, you can see them struggle with this. This beta has been going on for so long, and they actually then replaced their head of search in order to essentially, I believe, ship the product, right? So that's the innovator's dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel,
what do you? Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Partially is whether it's going to mess up their revenue right now. So, I mean, the money-making machine of ads on search and AdSense, and whether, so there's questions about how when Google shifts the number of clicks or the quality of quick clicks that go somewhere, the number of follow-on clicks that are going to happen on a website, and how that's going to shift the ad revenue for these sites that are generating content for their searchers. I mean, the 10 blue link economy, search engine optimization has been around, much maligned, but does incredibly core work to make Google work. Google could not function without the immense technical and content work done or advised by SEOs. And then you have these complicated questions, especially given the antitrust scrutiny for Google, of how they're going to work with ads, how they're going to have transparency about that. Like what you were saying, since they are ad driven, they can't really be very biased or not, in terms of, they don't want to make their big clients angry. But also they have, the FTC watching them. There's a lot, like you were saying, a lot of attention on them. But the core moneymaker seems potentially at risk depending on which direction they think they need to go to beat this small challenger.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? And I think there are a lot of moving parts in this ecosystem. I think if you watch and step back and think about this, I think Google is going to go as fast on this AI thing as they are forced to. Forced to, right? Mm-hmm. So Google has had, the very beginning, and we've been watching this for the last 18 years almost. Google was by far the biggest player in AI 15 years ago, right? Yeah. And in fact, OpenAI was started because Google was Google had there was a dispute between Elon Musk and Google founders because they were getting all the AI talent, right? So Google has had a lot of these models and a lot of this technology for a long time, and they've incorporated pieces of it into their search engine with RankBrain and Bird and these sort of different types of models. But the Chat GPT moment actually forced them to quickly commercialize and take more risks, right, with the existing model. So that's where I think the interesting question is on this risk, right? And the risk does have some part that's commercialization. I do believe that is a part of the equation. But another big risk is just the fundamental change on consumer behavior is a much bigger risk to Google's business, because the commercial aspect of monetization, I think they're actually pretty good at managing that dynamic, because we're parsing the pages and watching the ads. And the thing is, they're basically, as long as they can keep the audience, as long as they can keep their relevancy with the searchers, they will find their ways to monetize. Like, they're pretty good at the monetization model there. But where the crown jewel really starts to get threatened, I think, is if core search behavior starts to move, right? And so I don't think that is actually going to be just ChatGPT per se. But when you start to look at the mobile device, and when you start to look at GPT 4.0, and when you start to look at multimodal, and when you start to look at what's going to happen, at Apple's, Worldwide Developer Conference with the OpenAI deal, right? Remember, Google is and spends a ton of resources securing distribution by being the default search engine on iPhones, right? If that model starts to shift away from core keyword-driven search into more of a multimodal search, right, then there starts to become much more sort of fundamental challenges to that world order. And so I think what they're doing is they're really sort of innovating quickly to try to stay ahead. But core search behavior, I don't think it's going to fundamentally I don't think they'll get like completely destroyed or anything like that. They're as relevant as ever before. I think core search is still going to be important, but I think you will have more fragmentation. And that fragmentation is a problem because I think they've got to go multimodal, I think, a little bit faster and a little bit better than they have been, right? And I think there's a gap. And then if they start to lose certain choke points on distribution at the device level, I think you've got some bigger problems that would lie ahead.
So I'm just going to ask, just to get a sense. We know mobile search is very important. For traffic from mobile devices coming to a big publisher in the US, what does that look like? Does it look like 50% iPhone traffic, 25% iPhone traffic, 50% mobile? What do the numbers look like? 90% mobile, like?
So it's very dependent on the industry, right? But by and large, it's going to be more than half. I mean, it is
more than half.
More than half is mobile, right? Mobile is really, really big. Now, some industries like manufacturing, there's certain industries where if you're selling through VARs and things like that, it's still going to be very desktop heavy. But many are very mobile, right? So, in fact, Google, as of this week, I think has started to say if you don't have a mobile site that works, if you have errors on that mobile site where there are fundamental issues, they just de-index you. Like, blow you out of the index.
Wow.
So, because so much of because it's bad user experience for the search, right? So they don't want to send traffic that way.
Right. So if you have a site from the 1990s and you didn't update your HTML,
that's right. Yeah. You're gonna no longer be visible.
So one more question. All right. So I think ChatGPT has demoed a desktop app product on Mac. They have the Copilot PC on Windows, and it looks as though now they're just doing screen capture, but it looks as though the next step would be agentic, as in like, hey, go research hotels for me, and it's gonna kind of like use your own browser, gonna click on booking.com, gonna look at all the hotels visually, it has a visual parser, etc. And then it's gonna kind of come back to you and kind of give you a research. And it looks like that's their way around this kind of, we're stealing your referral hits, the agents are just eating it up. So they're just basically gonna post a bot on your screen to do it, in front of you and open up the windows actively. how would publishers see that, right? Because they're kind of still getting the referrals, they're still getting the hits, but the hits are not actually human generated. It's kind of like this kind of, not a headless but a headful browser, right?
Mhm.
How would publishers view that?
I think as that evolves, I think two things will happen, right? I think the early models of that, if it's going through a web browser, I think publishers will be super happy, right? Like it's still the same type of sort of value to some extent. I think though what will happen over time is that you will end up with more native, just sort of agent level interactions, right? And
Yeah,
then
API, yeah.
different kinds of attribution. I think if OpenAI is successful, which I think they will be in many ways, right? But there will be different form factors. I think the vision there is very different than Google, right? I always think that the thing around OpenAI is they're going after AGI, right? They're not, and so organizing the world's information is more sort of a how, but not the why. Whereas Google fundamentally, their vision and mission is about organizing and gathering information. So the AI is more the how, right? Not the why. And so I think what will happen because of that is that, OpenAI will continue to push the envelope on creating essentially a digital twin, creating interactive agents, creating things that really sort of push the interaction model. Whereas Google will still be mostly, I think, going with a search-led approach of making it a fast experience to get the information you need. And those are two, different ways to approach the problem, right? And I think, I do think there's some innovator dilemma there from a commercialization perspective because Google does have an ad model, right? And that is the power core of how they monetize. So you really sort of Google and Facebook are kind of in one camp. And that is also why I do think that OpenAI and Apple have a much more complementary business model because fundamentally they can take a position that is user privacy is important. These autonomous agents have to have some level of privacy for the person using it, right? And so, I think it'll be very interesting to watch. I think for publishers and for businesses, you're going to continue to need to be discoverable and interact with the different ways in which your end consumer and shopper wants to interact with you, right? So attribution models will change, interaction touch points will change. But I think it'll go a bit based on which model gets real sort of acceptance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Go ahead, Daniel.
Just the comments on business models driving the core behavior makes me think about, one, the deal, the framework for cooperation between SEOs and content websites and the various websites and Google in the past, the search engines in the past, has been, you let us look at your content and we'll send you buyers of your stuff or people to read what you have. And there are a lot of people complaining about both the potential loss of some of those clicks and eyeballs, but also the, maybe not fair use, maybe fair use, theft of content. And and people have proposed alternative business models like the Yep search engine from Ahrefs, still getting off the ground, but proposing that they're going to share revenue with.
I think they're a competitor, Daniel.
Roger. But and then TikTok, another search challenger in many ways, and they do share advertising revenue. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but based off the number of viewers, the creators get revenue. And those are very distinct models. And that whole, not just the decisions these companies are making, but also, the search tools are making, but also all these creators and users who are value aligned perhaps with the companies that they like to go to, whether there's going to be foot traffic going one way or another, or if you see more shifts in that or more intentional engagements between, with Perplexity, for instance, so your search generative parser looked at the differences based off industry of like the correlation with Google results versus Perplexity results.
Yes.
And a couple of them were much lower, but like Perplexity is using the Yelp data feed, so that's perhaps shifting some of that. But there's all sorts of people that might want to give Perplexity a data feed. I haven't seen much more talk about that sort of stuff. But at the same time, in addition to referral traffic, Perplexity could be sharing with website owners analytics data. I haven't seen that. Apparently, TikTok's starting to do that a couple months ago. I don't know if this larger question, the larger ecosystem, if you could comment some on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is a huge dynamic that is starting to play out. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head on one of the big sort of areas where I think is going to be a lot of action. And frankly, Google's way ahead of the curve, right? So watch these moves. Okay. So Google does, I think it was a $200 million deal, 3-year deal, right, with Reddit before the IPO. Why? They're locking up the data assets of content to train their AI model to be able to answer certain questions. They also did a deal with Stack Overflow, right, where you have a lot of community content for developer type questions. They also, I think OpenAI just announced some of the deals they're doing. I think Shutterstock just did some deals, right? And so there's kind of this interesting aspect where there are, I think of it like beachfront real estate data assets, right, in this world of Gen AI, because these engines need to source information from somewhere. As you know, like the generative model has to generate it. So the thing is, in a lot of these areas, where do you get access to these data sets, right? And so that's one part, right? So Google's already licensing a bunch of this stuff, right? You're going to buy up all the beachfront, sort of properties, right? And real estate, and then Perplexity starting, right? That kind of, I think of it as like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So Yelp, right? Not a fan of Google, right? Mm-hmm. Other players, right? You can kind of envision, maybe for travel, they partner with TripAdvisor, right? Like you can kind of play this forward, right? And who's the big backer behind Perplexity? One of the big investors is Bezos, right? You can kind of start to see commerce sort of type of content, maybe product feeds and things like that Google has a very native access to in terms of the data sets, because both big CPG companies as well as big retailers feed it to them, right? Start to feed it to Amazon, start to feed it to Perplexity. Like part of this is there are going to be data assets where the engines will need to strike partnerships and licenses. The other part of this is, well, what happens to the open web, right? Well, the open web is a huge corpus of information. And as our generative parser showed, 50% of the Perplexity, sort of results included a citation from the first page of Google, right, for the related keywords. And so what that tells you is you still need, like the long tail is very, very, very long. Right, the search queries get very, very specific, and to have good answers, you still have to build a very good index that gets information across every corner that you can find it, right, in order to really answer some of these questions. And so I think it's going to be both an ecosystem that you will have to have a really good index to feed the engine, as well as a licensing and business development aspect of being able to lock up a lot of the key data assets. And so that will, I think, be a big part of the future of search. Also remember, I think, a very interesting dynamic here, right? As the world becomes multimodal, right? Google owns one of the most powerful training data sets in YouTube. Like video content, I mean, when OpenAI is training video, it's using YouTube. There's a lot of training, a lot of video. So the tech titans have a lot of these moving parts that they can kind of play with, and then there's this interesting question of what happens to the open web. What are sort of new entrants, able to kind of find sort of entry points to attack in this moment of disruption?
So let me give you a maybe not a truth, but a mythology, right? Like this is a mythology a story that I hear. You have, like, a couple of years ago, Jasper, right? Jasper and like these firms, and they get access to GPT-3. They get access to GPT-3 and they start creating a lot of like AI generated SEO content.
Mm-hmm.
That SEO content is often kind of like, 2 or 3 main points, but like a lot of like, fitting into the 600 words or whatever that you need in order to get, indexed on Google, right? As a result of that, Google's search experience started to degrade. Like the 10 blue links got less and less and less useful because people were basically doing better AI generated content.
That's right.
And that AI generated content started to overwhelm the quality of the 10 blue links. Google kind of didn't pay attention that much because their revenues were, ramping up all the time, and they just increased ad load. Ad load on the front page on mobile has increased dramatically over the years. And basically what you're now seeing is like the last generation's GPT-3 generated AI SEO has started to basically like kill the quality of Google's, core search experience there. And that's where Google is right now. And Google kind of realized it a little bit late. And now they have to deploy new AI tools to kind of defend against this attack by AI SEO, which has been generated from the outside. So it's kind of like this one version of AI fighting off another version of AI, except the giant was kind of a little bit asleep. So just kind of critique that kind of mythology. Like, would you agree with that? This is kind of something that you might hear from someone in the value is like,
I think there is some of that for sure. However, there's also a bigger picture thing that's happening here, right? So, but let's zoom into that piece a little bit, right? But let's kind of have a little bit of the history of how the web has evolved with search, right? Yeah. So even if you step back 5 years ago, this type of problem existed, but in a different form, right? So the search engines have always fought this thing of duplicate content. Duplicate content is the concept that, hey, somebody creates something and boom, it gets replicated everywhere. Or you create one version and you create like 1,000 variants essentially of the same thing because you just try to get a lot of search traffic. So they've always fought off this problem of duplicate content. And in the old days, it was kind of, about exact match or near matches because you can kind of parse the text and see that, hey, this stuff is pretty close, right? And it's a duplicate. It's a duplicate. It's a duplicate. And then you can apply sort of weights to say, hey, this site generates a lot of duplicate, or this section has a lot of duplicates. I'm just not going to even go there. And I'm not
Levenstein distance and like a bunch of other tools. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, there's this brief moment here, right? Now, if you even go back in time, you'll see there were moments in time in search when you could just feed a bunch of database parameters and generate it off a template, and you would win a whole sort of series of queries, right? They were near duplicates. The AI version of what you're talking about is AI generated duplicates. So were they late to the party to detect AI duplicates? Absolutely. Right? They did not sort of kind of preempt and detect because the AI duplicates, they don't look the same, right? In probabilistic models, they're generating variants, and so you can't it's not like this exact match thing that say, oh, the words are the same, but actually they're pretty much the same, right? So there was this moment, and there continues to be. There are techniques that people are using to try to kind of game the system and do this type of stuff. But I would say you can see every single update, like the helpful content update that Google did, the domain sort of attributes they look at. I mean, they're getting better at this, and they're going to get even better at it over time. And so I don't think that's really a durable strategy if you're a business or a marketer to just use the AI to generate duplicate content. And I think actually what you're seeing Google do, and it's not just Google, any search engine has this problem. But what they're starting to do is really zoom in on this concept of one, there's still there's technical tags, right? And I think these are going to be very important. These schema tags, the structure around the unstructured information. that tell you this piece of content was created by this creator, by this author, by this organization. And the AI engines are going to get better and better at figuring out the original source and the first occurrence. Those two variables.
Is it metadata? Is it
metadata?
What do you?
It's metadata and appearance, right? Because the thing is that there will be over time more transparency into the citation. I believe that over time, the way it's going to move is people are going to demand more and more transparency into the citation, whether for copyright reasons or for consumer transparency reasons. People just don't want this black box where it generates an answer. They're going to want to be able to know where did it come from, right? As you open the box and understand where did it come from, the weighing of the factors are going to go more and more towards saying, if it is from this source, I trust it for these topics. You can see Google already doing that today. As I mentioned, with our BrightEdge generative parsers, we parse all these different industries. And in no other industry is that more clear than when you look at healthcare queries. Healthcare queries are ones where, you type in a disease name and boom, Google will say, hey, here's an AI overview of that. It's going to give you a warning. It's going to say, hey, don't self-diagnose, go talk to a doctor. You're searching for this thing. It's not right. It's an area where it makes sense that instead of throw 10 blue links at you, give you some framing around this so that you actually understand, put some warnings around it. But not only that, it's clearly weighing certain authorities. It's providing information summarized from the CDC, from Mayo Clinic, from the NIH. So the AI models will have better and better understanding of what is a trusted source of information to cite for different areas, right? And so those signals will be very important. So what does that mean for me if I'm a marketer or a business? What it means for me as a marketer or business is I should make sure that I understand what are the topics where I have a right to win, that I should be out there putting content around. So it's not so much that I'm going to put out, duplicate, auto-generated content. Like, for example, if you look at what we've done, we've said, look, we've spent 18 years in search, tracking all this data. Why don't we, in this moment, start becoming the authoritative source, or one of the authoritative sources that publishes information only we would have, that we would have credibility sharing with people what we're seeing, because we're looking at all this data and we're looking at all these industries and all these companies. And so the thing is, every brand and every business kind of has an area where it's their sphere of influence and their sphere of sort of expertise where they have a right to win. And I think the next generation, not just of SEO, but AIO, kind of AI optimization, is more about making sure you're building up your authority in these areas where you have a right to win, because that is the thing that the world wants to know from you, right? And then what you provide is something that will be cited not only by the AI, but also by any sort of end customer or prospect that's looking for information.
So how does that going to affect when, sometimes the authoritative voice on a particular topic could be like a 18-year-old neckbeard in like Southern Virginia or something, right? And it happens because you have like certain verticals, certain bloggers who become like, extremely good at like one specific thing. Like there's a guy I know, for example, who's very good at semiconductor marketing. And he started off as like a 12-year-old, and now he's like 26, and he goes to see Jensen Huang, like, regularly, right? And he's just a blogger. He's just started off as a blogger, right? But then you end up in this thing where you have an enterprise, like a semiconductor company, that wants to be authoritative, but the real authoritative voice is sitting outside the firm, and they're the ones like making these pronouncements, and their content is gonna get up there, right? Like what do firms do with that?
I think you do both. I think that is the future, right? I think you will never be in a market where you are the only voice. You have to be one of the cited sources, right? In the old days of SEO, it was all about link building. Let me go find another site that will link to me and do this. In the future, it's going to be about influence, right? Corroborate the story with the influencers that matter in your area, provide useful perspectives, data, and insight in the topics where you have the right to win. You won't be the only voice. Frankly, I think the algorithms will get better and better at this concept of, there's an old algorithm, old now, but it's been around for a while, that Google had a patent for called query deserves diversity. And query deserves diversity says, look, if I have a single query and I'm going to surface all these, kind of these 10 blue links, I need to give you different kinds of perspectives. AI will have its own version of query deserves diversity, right? And the thing about that is, what does that mean for me as a business is I need to know who is in that neighborhood and influence that, right? And that's a part of how I need to do my marketing. And that will be sort of the next frontier. So Jensen Huang should talk to that blogger, because that is a renowned expert in your topic area, right? And that sort of democratization of expertise, I think, is a good thing, not a bad thing. But I think the engines will have to get very good at, providing and summarizing diverse perspectives, because you don't want AI hardware information and next-gen AI information only from Jensen Huang, because NVIDIA has a very good perspective, but you probably want to know what Grok does. You probably want to know like other perspectives, right? You want an independent commentator to have a perspective on which model works versus not. And it's all going to be pretty interesting, right? And so I think that is sort of where this is all headed.
Can you talk a little more about the right to win? Some of my research.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, is that a term of art?
Some of my research has been on how users complain to Google and how Google responds. And so some of that is, this just a random searcher upset about something, rightfully or maybe wrongfully per Google. And they make a complaint on Google and Google responds. But your other complaints are like SEOs speaking up for their clients, complaining to the different Google representatives often on Twitter or in the Google forums. And I'm curious, it's so important to recognize, contra many of our intuitions and how we actually act, that Google isn't perfect. That you can have done everything right, you can have a right to win, and they can be failing. And I'm really curious whether you see yourself or what the role of the SEOs are in telling Google, showing Google that their SERP for this query is wrong.
Yeah, that does happen, right? Google definitely gets some things wrong, but I think on the whole, they get a lot right, but they do get some things wrong. I'll tell you one thing that I kind of see fairly frequently, but by the way, this problem is much worse. People criticize Google. This is much worse with OpenAI than it is with Google, if you're very objective about this. It's rewarding the big guys instead of the small guys. Does this make sense? So Google, it turns out, actually does have the biggest index, bar none. It has more servers. It throws those resources at indexing the web. It just is able to get more information from all the outer edges. And so compared to everybody else, right? So I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying compared to everybody else, it looks at the small guys more than anybody else does. But on the whole, it still rewards the big guys just as a shortcut. Like you think about this, right? There's something the big guys could just put out like garbage, right? And then they'll still win because their domain authority, like the brand authority, is so strong that they just win without really creating anything super valuable. Whereas a small guy can do something really valuable, but then just it ends up not winning, right? So I think that's a dimension you see a good amount, because it's like it's just easier. and the other engines do it too. They don't even have a big enough index to see the small guys, so they just serve you whatever is the most the stuff that has the most. So that's one area. And related to that, in the AI world, one thing that's pretty interesting that these guys are making, again, this is the other thing people don't understand as much, is this is the worst the AI will ever be. It will only get smarter from here. Does that make sense? People are like, oh, it says put glue in the pizza, and it's totally right. There's hallucination. There isn't guardrails. There's all these problems, but this is the worst they'll ever be. Right? It only gets much better from here. This is true with GPT as well, right? So the thing is, the thing about that is that if you look at one of the kind of things in the AI versions right now is, let's say you are a very targeted market. Let's say you're buying enterprise software, right? You're at a Fortune 500 company. You're going to buy some software for payment processing, let's say, right? And that is a small number of sort of raw audience. It's a very small number of people, but it's very targeted, right? If you go search for those queries in most of these engines, it's going to surface somebody like Square, even though it has no relevance to you. And the reason for that is because as a shortcut, a little bit like the thing of the power of the brand, they're just looking at volume, right? They're saying, look, did you see how so many people click on this thing? Like, I'm just going to reward this site. It has nothing to, this has no relevancy to you, right? So there's these errors that they're making, and they've in the classic world of search, they do a great job of this, pretty good. But in the AI world, the signals, they haven't kind of gotten the signals right yet. So you see a lot of these type of mistakes. They're clearly trying to figure that out, right? Or they will have to figure some of this stuff out. But on the whole, I think they're trying to make it better and better. But I'd say the areas are clearly, it's like, big guys over small guys, and volume over accuracy, kind of in the early days.
Right on. Jim, I think we're coming to the end of our allocated time slot. So thank you so much for your time. It was, I learned a lot. Daniel?
Yeah, this is super great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Awesome.
I love this area. We've been doing AI for a long time. We've been doing search a long time. Lots of data, lots of brands. So love chatting about it, and we're seeing all kinds of stuff all the time. So love to keep the conversation going.
Awesome.
Emergent Behavior is a part of the Turpentine Network. For our full newsletter, visit emergentbehavior.co. For more Turpentine podcasts and sponsorship inquiries, visit turpentine.co